Wow. That was an amazing conversation that I had with Mr. Donnie B. Reed about the malice of matriarchy. And I hope that you enjoyed that conversation just as much as I did. I hope that you learned something, that you were educated, empowered, and enlightened by that conversation that we had about those different things that show up generationally as mothers, as women, as we're parenting children, when we don't heal from our pain, from our trauma, from our emotions, when we don't take that time to heal. So much was talked about, so much was unpacked. And I just want to take this time to do a recap and reflection of those things that we have learned for the last month. We're talking about the Malice of Matriarchy, and this is the story right in the two-time best-selling book, an international best-selling book, Trapped Behind Enemy Lines in My Mind. Our definition of malice. What is malice? Malice is the desire to inflict injury, harm, or suffering on another, either because of hostile impulse or out of deep-seated meanness. And the definition of matriarchy is a family, society, community, or state governed by women. So when we talk about the malice of matriarchy, we're talking about how our family, society, community, our states, how these institutions are affected when we don't heal from those emotional scars and that trauma that we've had in the past, in our personal lives or generationally. So just looking at that and how that transpires. In part one of Malice of Matriarchy and that conversation with me and Donnie, one of the things that we brought up was when we do not heal emotionally as women and mothers, once again, we pass down unhealthy behaviors to our children that we express due to pain, hurt, and unforgiveness. And so some of the ways that can show up is in sarcasm, in belittling, anger, yelling, self-hatred. These are all of those things that can manifest towards our children, our husbands, our spouses, those who we are in community with. And a lot of times when those emotions are buried, we're not aware of them, they're not in our conscious mind, we don't know why we're doing it. And so we definitely want to bring some awareness to that. So with the reflections, what I would recommend is for you to journal. Like a lot of the things that we talked about are very heavy. And if you're hearing it for the first time, taking it in, absorbing it, if you're a person who's ready to start digging a little bit deeper, you know that you've been affected by the things that we talked about. When it comes to the reflections are more like a journal prompt. So I would recommend that you grab pen, grab paper, and seriously sit down and think about these questions. These questions, they're going to open up a lot of emotions. They'll make you think about some things that you may not have thought about before, but it's going to help you get to the root of why you are behaving, thinking, and feeling the way they're feeling in regards to some of these things that we talked about, how you may be showing up as a wife, how you may be showing up as a mother. And even as we said during our conversations, our men are affected too, because we have so much influence, whether the man, the father is in the home or in the life of the child or not, the children are very heavily influenced by the mother most of the time. So even for our men, this will uncover some of those emotions, some of those thoughts, behaviors that you may be having as a result of the malice of matriarchy. And so I want you to take these reflections very seriously. Do you have resentment for your assignment as a mother? Donnie, he brought up a good point that many of us as mothers may be having resentment for our assignment as a mother. Before he said that, I had never thought about it in that way. And so that's a deep question for us to ask ourselves as mothers, as women who have that ability and that responsibility to nurture. Do you have a resentment for your assignment as a mother? And so another point that he brought up was you love the baby, but do you love the life that comes with the baby? And this is a judgment-free zone. The only way you're going to get free, the only way that you're going to start to move forward in your life is to tell the truth. And whether the truth is pretty, ugly, or something in between, just tell the truth. No judgment. Write the first thing that comes to your mind. If you have a trusted person that you can talk to about these things, talk to that person. I'm an advocate for therapy. If therapy has helped you, if it's something you want to try, go to therapy. Listen, uncover what needs to be uncovered so you can move forward and heal. Let's move forward. In part two of the recap, how your parent or caregivers raise you it's how you were raised. And that's very important to know, because a lot of times as parents, we believe that mentality, do as I say and not as I do. But those are just words. That it doesn't really happen like that. Your children that you are raising, they will do what you do. It's important for us to talk about these things, because if you don't deal with it, you will pass it down. So those things that we see in ourselves that we don't like, our parents or caregivers dealt with the exact same thing. And so in order to prevent that from moving on to the next generation, we have to face it head on. This is a quote from Donnie: "I am a man, not because of a man." Think about that. And so that's the reason for inviting him on, because I definitely wanted to get that male perspective. How have our men been affected? How are our boys being affected by the malice of matriarchy? A lot of times we talked about how that pain point for a lot of women, especially single mothers or widowed mothers, if for whatever reason that the man is not in the life of the child, that can often be a pain point. And we believe that because the man is not there, the boys are having some behavioral issues. And that can be very true. It is also true that as the mothers, as women who are very close to the children and raising them day by day, we have that influence over how they think, how they feel, and how they behave. This is mental health all in one. How you think, how you feel, how you behave. We have the influence over our children, sons included. And so we have to start thinking about how we think and feel as mothers. How is that affecting our sons? And then third, how do you shift power to the man when all you've seen is women have the power to be the boss in the family? That was another quote that Donnie spoke during part 2 of the conversation. And I thought it was important that we really think about. It comes into that recap, but it also be a reflection. So I would encourage you to journal that too, because some of them do go hand in hand. If you are married, and as Donnie pointed out, you've never been in a household, you've never seen a man be in power or be in authority, it could be very hard to then shift from being that submissive wife. And I know that word submissive can definitely be a trigger for some women. I am not speaking of abuse. Abuse is something different. Submission is you have a husband who is doing the right thing. He's not abusive. He's not putting his hands on you. He's not emotionally and verbally abusive. And he is trying to establish order in the family, a plan for the family. And you find yourself not able to submit to his plan and his vision for the family and work together with him to move forward. If you find yourself not able to do that, then the question is, why? So definitely want you to reflect on that. As far as reflection, do you know your primary love language? And the reason that I brought this up was because during our conversation, I talked about how as a child, I did not feel my mother's love. Even though she was doing all of these things, she made sure everything was good. We always had food on the table. She always went to work. We always made our doctor's appointment. She was always doing. She was an acts of service type of woman and words of affirmation. But for me, I found out in my adulthood that my primary love language is quality time. And so although she was doing these other things to show her love or communicate her love, I did not feel that love. And so we just talked about how it's important as mothers to know our love language, how we receive love, and then to do some exploring to see what our children's primary love language is, so that we can communicate that love to each other. We don't want to give the love that we think someone should get. We want to give them what is beneficial to them. And so we brought that up. Definitely, if you don't know your primary love language, I would definitely recommend that book, The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. And then there's also a short version form where you can do an assessment online and find out what your primary love language is. You want to give your children the love that they need, not the love that you believe they should get. And then you would see some improvement in your relationships with your children. For mothers with sons, did you realize you have great influence over your son's behavior? So that's for my mothers with sons. We talked about that pain point of not having your son's father in your life. Sometimes we can focus all of that energy and all that negativity towards the father not being there as being the reason why your son's behavior is not what you believe it should be. But the truth is that you have that influence over your son's behavior. So let's start to focus on what we can change and what we can do as mothers. Do you have a challenge relinquishing control in your relationships? And if the answer is yes, then why? I also challenge that if the answer is no, I want to know why, because then we can compare and see what are some of those social factors, environmental factors, life experiences that have made it easy for you to submit to your husband or not submit to your husband. That's really what we were talking about when we were referring to this relinquishing control, when we were talking in part 2 of that conversation. In part 3 of our conversation, some of the recap that I believe is crucial for us to think about is really it has been taboo to speak against the family matriarch. Yeah, I grew up in the South. I'm from Alabama. So if you think about talking about Big Mama, Madea, Meemaw, if it even slips out of your mouth, people would fight about that. You can't just talk about people's mamas and grandma. So this is something very serious. So I don't know how it is in other parts of the world, but it's been very taboo to speak against the family matriarch. No matter what her behavior is, just to say anything about her has been an abomination. And so we want to bring that to the forefront and ask the question why. We know what she's done for us. Getting up early in the morning, making sure breakfast is done, going to work, making sure everything is done, that you're always okay. And it's hard to speak against that when her behavior is off. It feels like a betrayal in a way. It makes you feel like you're in this area where even though your feelings might be hurt, or maybe you feel like you want to address the behavior, it's hard to, because you know what she's done for you. You must decide what type of mother you are going to be. I think that's a personal thing, but then as we talked about in our conversation, if you have grown up in a matriarchal society, then as a woman, you are conditioned to be the head of your household, whether you have a husband or not. It's kind of like a pre-programming. You decide what type of mother you're going to be, whether you're married or not. I am conditioned to be the boss. I don't know how to submit to a man's authority. The fourth thing is know your motives for submitting to your husband. If you caught that conversation, we were talking about how you have to check your heart motives when you're submitting to your husband and then submitting to your wife. Because for me and my husband, I talked about the fact that as children, we had that history of people pleasing. And so a lot of times in the beginning of our marriage, we would just do things for each other because we didn't want the other person to be mad. And it wasn't necessarily because we loved each other or because we were doing it from the heart of God. We wanted to just really serve each other, but it was more from that trauma response of, hey, I don't want my husband to be mad with me. I want him to think well of me. This is what a good wife would do. So this is what I'm going to do. As far as our reflections, how has the malice of matriarchy shaped you as a man or woman? We talked about how we have the influence as women, as mothers. It affects both our male and female children. Do you feel like you were an emotional crutch for the women who raised you? Now that's going to be deep. I might be biased in saying this, but I think this might be a little bit easier for the women to admit than the men, because I love Donnie's transparency in our conversation. He talked about how he's able to talk about those things now, those emotions that affected him as a young boy, as a young man, but he also has so much reverence for his great-grandmother and for his mother and those women who took care of him. And so it's almost like you can indirectly become an emotional crutch for those women because you honor them so much, because you know what they've done for you. Just take some time to explore that. And whatever your first response is, take it. But some of these, like we talked about in one of the lessons, that emotions can be very hard to uncover because they're part of our subconscious. So we're not really thinking about them, but they do affect how we think, how we feel, and how we behave. It may take some time for some of those real raw emotions to come up because a lot of times we don't want to offend the woman or the women in our life who took care of us. And so I just challenge you to sit on some of these reflections. Do you find it hard to submit to your husband's authority and or male authority? And that ties back into us as women of a matriarchal society being conditioned to be the boss. These are some of those questions that will help you uncover the why. Why is it hard for you to submit to your husband's authority or male authority? And that could be in the workspace. It could be, if you're not married, a brother, an uncle, someone who may be close to you, who may be in authority, be in charge. If you find yourself resisting that authority or his attempts to exert authority and set order, then why? Like I said, this is a judgment-free zone, but if we don't go there, We don't know. As a man, this is for our men. Are you overly aggressive or extremely passive when you need to establish order in your home with the women in your life? And so that's going to be the flip side. If you're a man who has traditionally been raised around a lot of women, you're used to the woman being in charge, calling the shots, telling you what to do. And then now, as a man, you try to exert your authority and establish order in the home. Once again, I have to put in this disclaimer. I'm not talking about abuse. I'm not talking about physical abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, or just any type of fear and intimidation to get your way. I'm talking about a man of great character and integrity, just having that problem, exerting your authority or establishing order in the home. Do you find yourself being passive or overly aggressive? And that could be because of the malice of matriarchy. So definitely want you to sit with that and then just examine, am I more affected by this than? Part 4. If you have never seen a functional relationship between a man and a woman in the home, how do you know how to behave? That was a question that Donnie brought up during our part 4 of our conversation. And I thought this was a good one to look at because we know that model behavior is our chances for success. When we can see someone do the thing that we wish to do, it increases our chances of success. And so if we've never seen a functional relationship, it doesn't mean that we can't get there, but it does mean that we may have some gaps and holes in how we are in relationship with our spouses, with our husbands and wives as it pertains to the malice of matriarchy. And so we want to be aware of that. Remember that behavior is a result of what we think and how we feel. The reason I wanted to bring that up is Donnie said, well, if I've never seen a functional relationship, how do I know how to behave? Well, our behavior is a direct result of how we think and what we feel. They all go hand in hand when we're talking about mental health. If you know a behavior, but you don't know the thoughts and the feelings associated with that behavior, then some things can also go under the radar. So we want to understand that they're all interrelated. How we think, how we feel produces behavior. And then we talked about how you go from missing your parents to being mad and angry to being numb and not caring. Wow, if you didn't catch this part of the conversation, please go back and listen to it because we kind of went into how the malice of matriarchy affects how we become numb as children. If we want our parents' love, we want our parents' affection, we want our parents to spend time with us, to talk with us, but when that doesn't come through neglect, abuse, whatever the situation is, then a lot of times there's a progression that happens as children before we get to that place of indifference. So we talked about how if you have a teenager or you have a child who seems to be disengaged, then has a progression happen. And that's something that you have to think about individually, that you really have to sit down and have a heart check about. Have I been paying attention to my children? Are they disengaged because I don't give them the time and the attention that they need or they desire from me? And now the children or the child has these emotions of, hey, I want to spend time with my parents. I wish they had more time for me, but now I'm conditioning myself to not want it. And so even though I want it, I'm going to be cold. I'm going to push them to the side. I'm just numb to that point where I don't even care anymore. That's something to think about because I know that our relationships with our children are very important. And so this is just something to take inventory of. Generationally, women have been conditioned to bottle up their experiences and emotions for children not to see. Once again, that was a quote by Donnie D.B. Reed. Please, if you didn't catch the conversation, go back and listen because it was so enlightening. He was just giving a charge to the men, really, to think about those things that your mother has been through before you start to judge her and think that she's just mean or she's just a certain way that she doesn't want to change. To understand generationally that women have been conditioned to bottle up their experiences and emotions for children not to see. And so sometimes that resentment for the assignment shows up as anger. It shows up as aggression. It shows up as sarcasm and belittling. And it shows up as avoidance. It shows up as just not being engaged. And so it's not an excuse, definitely not an excuse for unhealthy behavior, but it definitely gives some perspective for those men and women who don't don't understand why their mother is the way that she is. And so our reflections for part 4, I'm pretty sure we touched on it a little bit because I kind of went off on a little tangent. But do you know your value in being home and fully present and engaged with your children? I talked about that in our conversation as well, that I did not understand my value of being in the home and being fully present and engaged with my children. Why? Because you can't teach and you can't do what's not in you. That's not what I received from my parents. My parents were working. My parents were not at home a lot of the times. Yes, they did all of the acts of service, but being present and engaged with your children is something very different. And if you don't understand your value in the home because either you have a history generationally of working outside of the home, finding your value in work, finding your value in community, in church, in sports, whatever it is that you do outside of the home. If you've always found your value there, then this is something we have to talk about, become conscious and aware of. This is why we talk about these things. It just may not even have crossed your mind. So it's something to think about. And then we did talk about this, but do your children seem disengaged and disinterested in your relationship with them? And once again, that's because of that progression. You go from really missing your parents to becoming mad and angry and then becoming numb and not even caring. So then that indifference shows up and it sets in the children. Then you have this bridge, this gap between mothers and children, fathers and children, because the fathers are also affected by the malice of matriarchy. So you see it both ways. Even though we're talking about mothers, definitely affects the fathers as well. You see this gap and you don't know why. You don't know why your children are disengaged. You love them, you care for them, you do for them, but at the same time, you know something is off. And so that's definitely something to reflect on and just get down to that root cause. So I have a prayer for the malice of matriarchy, for those who know that you have been affected by the malice of matriarchy. Either, were raised, how you were treated is how your parents were raised too. So how your parents raised you, your caregivers raised you, is how they were raised. And so if you identify with any part of the malice of matriarchy from your parents, from your mother figure, and then you see those things in yourself. I'm preaching to the choir. I have seen the malice of matriarchy in myself, and I don't want it to continue in me. And so this is a prayer really that I've said to myself and that I want to share, because I know that feeling of, God, something is wrong. I don't want these behaviors that are showing up and manifesting in me to continue and be passed on through my children. So this is a prayer for anybody who wants to uproot that malice of matriarchy. So, Father, I am sorry for being malice to myself and my family. Please forgive me. I choose to forgive myself for yelling, belittling, making sarcastic remarks, allowing anger and rage to control me, and displaying hatred towards myself and my family. I choose to forgive the women in my life who injured me spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, and socially due to unhealed pain and trauma. Today, I choose to allow you to heal my heart so that I do not continue to pass down unhealthy behaviors to my children and the generations to come. I choose to use the knowledge, power, and authority you have given me to change the trajectory of my life, family, and legacy. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So that's it. That is our recap and reflections for our conversation on the malice of matriarchy. And I want to once again thank Mr. Donnie D.B. Reed for coming and just sharing his knowledge about his life and his story with his mother and his great-grandmother to give that male perspective to this conversation. And so, hey, please engage with us on social media. Let us know what you think about this conversation. We've all had different experiences with our mothers and our mother figures in our life. And I want to know, how has the malice of matriarchy showed up in your life? How has that affected you as a man, as a woman, as a mother, as a father, as a friend? How has the malice of matriarchy affected you? You can follow me on Facebook, on Instagram, to my YouTube channel where you can find these episodes of Restore Hearts exclusively on my channel. Also, you can follow me on TikTok, follow me on Clubhouse, so we can continue this conversation on the malice of matriarchy. I can't wait to hear what your responses are to this topic. Don't forget, you can pre-order your books today. That information is all over this broadcast. So support, support, support. And don't forget that if you're being educated, if you're being empowered by this broadcast, then consider being a one-time or monthly sponsor of this show. All gifts are appreciated and are greatly valued. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.